In a small town called Pineville, nestled in the heart of Montana, the intercity bus came to a halt at the modest bus station. Among the few passengers who disembarked, two women stood out, not for their appearance, but for the determination etched in their eyes. Victoria Mendelsohn, a 45-year-old woman, and her 22-year-old daughter, Laura, carried just 2 suitcases each, and what seemed like a lifetime of experiences stored in their silence. "Mum, are you sure this is the right place?" Laura asked, glancing around at the small town that seemed frozen in time. Its modest buildings and slow pace were a stark contrast to the bustling cities they had once called home. "Absolutely, my dear. This is where we start over, far from everything that hurt us," Victoria replied, adjusting the sunglasses that hid her deep, determined brown eyes. The two walked to a small inn in the town center, where they had booked a temporary room. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Zilda, looked at them with poorly concealed curiosity. "Are you just passing through, or do you plan to stay longer?" she asked while registering their documents. "We're here to stay," Victoria replied firmly. "We're looking to rent a house and perhaps open a small business." News of the newcomers spread quickly through Pineville. In a town like this, novelties were rare and precious, fueling conversations in bars, markets, and beauty salons. Speculations about who these two women were, women who spoke little of their past, began to circulate. 3 days after their arrival, Victoria and Laura were having coffee at the only bakery in the central square when a man of imposing presence entered the establishment. Everyone immediately straightened up and greeted him with exaggerated deference. It was Theodore Magellan, the most powerful man in the region, owner of Green Gold Ranch, which dominated the local economy with its soybean and cattle production. "Good morning, folks," he announced loudly, spreading calculated smiles. When his eyes landed on the two strangers, his expression changed. "And who do we have here, new residents for our humble Pineville?" Before they could respond, the bakery owner hurriedly said, "This is Victoria and Laura, Mr. Magellan. They arrived this week." Theodore approached their table with the confidence of someone who had never been contradicted. "Welcome to my town. I'm Theodore Magellan, but you probably already know that." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "And what brings two ladies alone to a place as remote as this?" "We're here to start over," Victoria replied simply, unbothered by his condescending tone. "Start over?" Theodore chuckled. "You need resources. To start over, ma'am. Pineville isn't a place for adventurers." Laura felt her face burn with indignation, but her mother remained calm, taking a sip of coffee before responding. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Magellan, but we have enough for our plans." That calm response, instead of easing Theodore's curiosity and suspicion, seemed to irritate him further. He wasn't used to women who weren't impressed by his presence. "Well, I wish you both luck. You'll need it." He turned to the other customers and announced, "This Saturday there will be a party at Green Gold to celebrate our record harvest. Everyone is invited." Then, looking back at Victoria and Laura, he added, "You two as well, of course. It'll be a chance to see how our society works." After he left, the bakery buzzed with excited chatter about the party, while furtive glances were cast in the direction of the newcomers. "I don't like that man," Laura whispered. "Calm down, dear. Remember why we're here," Victoria replied softly. In the following weeks, mother and daughter rented a modest house on the outskirts of town and began frequenting local establishments, always polite but reserved. Victoria often visited the bank, while Laura spent hours in the town's only library, studying local agriculture. On the day of the party, defying general expectations, they showed up at Green Gold Ranch. The property was impressive, a majestic main house surrounded by immaculate gardens, modern barns and fields stretching as far as the eye could see. Theodore Magellan spared no expense in displaying his wealth. "Look who decided to grace us with their presence," Theodore exclaimed upon seeing them, surrounded by his usual sycophants. "The mysterious newcomers." The party was filled with the local elite, all dressed in their finest, clearly trying to impress the host. Victoria and Laura, in contrast, were elegantly but modestly dressed. "So what do you think of my humble abode?" Theodore asked, gesturing broadly. "Impressive," Victoria replied sincerely. The property is beautiful. I built all this from nothing, you know, with sweat and intelligence. It's not for everyone. Indeed, not everyone gets that opportunity, Laura commented, her tone somewhere between admiration and irony. Theodore narrowed his eyes, trying to decipher the true meaning of her words. Before he could respond, one of his foremen approached to inform him of an issue with one of the tractors. "Excuse me, ladies, duty calls. Business waits for no one." He walked away, but not before adding, "Enjoy the party. It's probably the closest you'll ever get to a place like this." As he left, a middle-aged woman approached them. "Don't mind Theodore. He treats everyone like that when they first arrive." "Cecilia Vasquez," she introduced herself, extending her hand. "I'm a teacher at the local school." "Nice to meet you," Victoria replied. "It seems Mr. Magellan has quite the influence around here." Cecilia lowered her voice. "Influence is an understatement. He practically controls everything. Most businesses depend on him in some way. If you're not employed at the ranch, you're selling to it or its employees." "Has no one ever challenged him?" Laura asked, genuinely curious. "Some have tried," Cecilia sighed, "but Theodore has ways of making life difficult for those who cross him. The last one was Miguel Alvarez, who tried to start an independent cooperative. He ended up selling everything and moving away." Their conversation was interrupted when Theodore stepped onto a small makeshift stage to give a speech. He spoke at length about his achievements, how Pineville owed its prosperity to his investments, and how he planned to expand his domain even further. "This year, I plan to acquire the lands in the northern region, which are lying unproductive, in the hands of visionless owners," he announced, sparking murmurs in the crowd. Everyone knew he was referring to small farmers who resisted selling their properties. At the end of the night, as Victoria and Laura prepared to leave, Theodore approached them again, this time accompanied by his son, Gabriel, a 25-year-old, who had inherited his father's arrogance but not his cunning. "So did you enjoy the party? Did you see how the real winners of Pineville live?" Gabriel taunted, holding a glass of whiskey. "It was an interesting night," Victoria replied. "Thank you for your hospitality." "I'm curious," Gabriel pressed. "What do two women alone expect to achieve in this town? Have you considered that maybe you've chosen the wrong place for your modest dreams?" Laura felt her mother's hand gently squeeze her arm, a signal to stay calm. "Perhaps you'll be surprised, Mr. Magellan," Victoria replied with an enigmatic smile. "Life is full of twists and turns." On the drive back to town, in their rented car, Laura finally vented. "How can he be so arrogant, so despicable?" Victoria kept her eyes on the dark road. Men like Theodore Magellan build their empires by subjugating others. They mistake fear for respect. "Do we really have to go through with this, Mum? This place and these people?" "More than ever, Laura." Victoria's voice grew firmer. "It's precisely because of people like him that we're here. Remember what your grandfather always said. Justice isn't revenge, it's restoration, Laura." Completed, reciting the motto she had heard so many times. "Exactly. And the time for restoration is coming for Pineville," Victoria concluded as the small town came into view, its faint lights dotting the darkness like distant stars. Unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon, 3 months had passed since Victoria and Laura arrived in Pineville. The town had grown accustomed to their presence, though speculation about their past remained. They had rented a small commercial, a space on the main street, where they opened an agricultural consulting office, a business that drew quiet laughter in Theodore Magellan's circles. Agricultural consulting. In Pineville? Everyone here was born with dirt on their hands, Gabriel Magellan scoffed during a meeting at the local business association. "What do those two think they can teach our producers?" However, to everyone's surprise, some small farmers began seeking Victoria and Laura's services. At first out of curiosity, then for results. Their technical knowledge was impressive. Laura, an agricultural engineering graduate from a prestigious university, introduced concepts of regenerative agriculture that few in the area knew. Victoria, meanwhile, mastered the financial and strategic aspects of agribusiness with a precision that intrigued even the most skeptical. One sunny April afternoon, Victoria was in her office when she received an unexpected visit. Joseph Silver, a former employee of Green Gold Ranch, now retired. "Mrs. Victoria, sorry for coming unannounced," the elderly man said, removing his worn straw hat. "But I needed to speak with you privately." Victoria offered him coffee and listened attentively. As Joseph revealed what many in Pineville knew but feared to mention, Theodore's questionable practices to expand his domain. He started with a small property inherited from his father, but he bought land from struggling neighbors, always below market value. Those who resisted faced mysterious problems: cut fences, missing cattle, difficulty selling their produce. "Why are you telling me this, Mr. Joseph?" Victoria asked calmly. "Because I saw how he treated you at the party, and because I'm too old to be afraid. I worked 40 years for the Millionaire'S, saw a lot of wrongdoing and stayed silent. Now I just want to do the right thing before—" He left the sentence hanging. Joseph shared details about Theodore's dealings with suppliers, buyers, and financial institutions. He mentioned shell companies Theodore used to acquire land and evade taxes. He spoke of manipulated contracts and suspicious agreements with local politicians. "Do you have proof of all this?" Victoria asked, showing no surprise. Joseph pulled a worn USB drive from his pocket. "I have copies of contracts, emails, recordings of meetings. My nephew works in the ranch's administration and has been collecting this over the years. He's too scared to use it, but gave me permission to pass." Sat on. Victoria thanked him for his trust and promised to be cautious. After Joseph left, she called Laura to share the discovery. "It's worse than we thought," she commented as they reviewed the documents on the computer. "Theodore isn't just arrogant, he's manipulative and corrupt." "This makes our job easier," Laura observed, typing furiously on her laptop. "Every piece of evidence here is leverage we can use." In the following weeks, mother and daughter intensified their discreet actions. While maintaining the facade of their consulting business, they worked tirelessly on their true plan. Laura frequently traveled to the state capital for meetings with lawyers and contacts in the banking sector. Victoria, meanwhile, reached out to small producers, offering free guidance and building a network of allies. At one such meeting, she met Anthony Rivers, the owner of a mid-sized market struggling to survive the competition from a network associated with Theodore. "You don't understand," he vented. "Theodore controls the suppliers. They charge me 15% more than they charge his network. How can I compete like that?" "What if you had direct access to producers, bypassing Theodore's middlemen?" Victoria suggested. "Impossible. He has exclusivity deals with the biggest ones." "Not all of them," Victoria smiled. "I'm organizing a cooperative with independent producers. We can guarantee better prices and superior quality." News of the cooperative's formation quickly reached Theodore. One May morning, he stormed into Victoria and Laura's small office unannounced. "What do you think you're doing?" he shouted, ignoring the other people present. "You come to my town and in less than 6 months try to change the natural order of things." Victoria remained seated, unshaken. "Good morning, Mr. Magellan. If you'd like to discuss business, I suggest you schedule an appointment with our secretary." "I don't need an appointment to speak in my own town," he bellowed, red with anger. "I came to warn you, you're playing with fire. Smarter people have tried to stand up to me and deeply regretted it." Laura, who'd been watching from her office, Celeste stepped forward. "Are you threatening us, Mr. Magellan? Because that would sound very bad in an intimidation lawsuit." Theodore seemed momentarily thrown off by the mention of legal action, but quickly regained his composure. "Threaten? No, dear, I'm just advising 2 uninformed women on how things work around here." He turned to Victoria. "Your little cooperative won't last 3 months. No bank will finance you, no buyer will risk their business. I have 40 years of influence in this state." "We'll see," Victoria replied simply. After he left, slamming the door, the clients present looked at the 2 women with a mix of shock and admiration. "I've never seen anyone stand up to Theodore like that," commented an elderly woman waiting for her appointment. Laura smiled. "There's a first time for everything, Mrs. Regina." The following months were a whirlwind of behind-the-scenes activity. As the cooperative grew, uniting over 20 small producers, Victoria and Laura executed the most crucial part of their plan. Using a network of trusted lawyers and investors, they began quietly acquiring strategic businesses around Pineville. The first was the transport company that handled the region's produce, purchased through an investment fund registered under third-party names. Next, they gained control of 2 agricultural supply companies that served Green Gold Ranch. Without Theodore's knowledge, his empire was becoming dependent on businesses controlled by those he had underestimated. In August, 6 months after their arrival, Laura flew to the state capital for a crucial meeting with executives from the bank that financed Theodore's operations. She carried a comprehensive dossier on Green Gold Ranch's irregularities, including evidence of fraud in previous financing contracts. "We don't want to cause a scandal," she explained to the stunned executives. "We just want the bank to review its credit policies more rigorously." The subsequent audit was discreet but relentless. Theodore's credit lines were restricted, additional collateral requirements were imposed, and payment terms were shortened. All within the bounds of the law, but with devastating consequences for Green Gold's cash flow. Meanwhile, in Pineville, Victoria solidified alliances. Her cooperative, now formally named New Earth, secured contracts with international buyers, paying premium prices for certified organic products, a specialty Laura had introduced among the members. The turning point came on a rainy September afternoon, when Gabriel Magellan approached Victoria in her office. Without his usual arrogance, he seemed worried. "My father doesn't know I'm here," he confessed, "but I need to understand what's happening. Suddenly all our business deals are being renegotiated, suppliers are raising prices, the bank is tightening conditions." "Times change, Gabriel," Victoria replied calmly. "Your father's business model worked for decades, but the market evolves. Maybe it's time for Green Gold to adapt." "I think you have something to do with this," he said, not as an accusation, but almost as a plea for confirmation. Victoria simply smiled. "Why would you think 2 simple consultants have that kind of power?" Gabriel left more troubled than he had arrived. On his way back to the ranch, he reflected on everything he had heard about these 2 mysterious women. He began to suspect there was much more to them than their modest facade. At Green Gold, he found Theodore in a tense meeting with his managers. The numbers weren't adding up. The harvest had been good, but costs had skyrocketed. Buyers had cancelled contracts, and the bank was pressing for early payments. "We need to sell some assets," the accountant suggested. "The lands in the eastern sector, perhaps. They're less productive." "Sell land? Never!" Theodore exploded. "Magellans don't sell, Magellans buy. Find another solution." But there was no other solution. In the following weeks, rumors of Green Gold's financial troubles began circulating in town. Employees complained of delayed wages. Suppliers demanded cash payments. The imposing ranch, which for decades had symbolized untouchable power, showed the first cracks in its facade. And at the epicenter of this silent earthquake, 2 women watched patiently, knowing the moment of truth was approaching. The empire Theodore had built with arrogance and intimidation was about to change hands, and he had no idea who the new owners would be. One particularly difficult night, after another frustrating meeting with creditors, Theodore returned home to find an unmarked envelope on his desk. Inside was a yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Businessman Cassius Mendelssohn loses everything in land deal fraud." The photo showed a defeated man beside his wife and young daughter. Theodore felt his blood run cold. That face. He knew that face. It was younger but unmistakable. It was Victoria Mendelssohn. "It can't be," he murmured, sinking heavily into his chair. Memories from 20 years ago flooded his mind. The scam he had pulled on a naive investor from the city, the forged documents, the veiled threats. It had been his first big deal, the springboard to his rise. He never imagined the past would come back to collect its debt. The official announcement came on an October morning, as the soybean fields began to show the vibrant green of new crops. Green Gold Ranch, the symbol of Pineville's heritage, was up for sale. The news spread like wildfire, stirring emotions in the small town where generations had lived under the Magellan's shadow. Theodore avoided public appearances. Locked in, his office at the ranch, he desperately sought investors willing to save him. Calls to old allies, Promises of lucrative partnerships, even attempts to renegotiate with banks, all in vain. The empire he had built was collapsing like a house of cards. "Why won't anyone help us?" Gabriel asked, watching his father hang up another fruitless call. "We've always had powerful allies." "Because someone is behind all this," Theodore replied, his voice bitter. "Someone very well connected and resourceful, and I'm almost certain who it is." That afternoon, without warning, Theodore went to Victoria and Laura's office. Unlike his last visit, there was no fury in his gestures, only the resignation of someone who finally understood the game he was in. "May I come in?" he asked, without his usual commanding tone. Victoria gestured to the chair in front of her. "Of course, Mr. Magellan, what brings you here?" For a moment, Theodore just looked at her, as if trying to see through the facade of simplicity she had maintained for months. "Victoria Mendelssohn, daughter of Cassius. Mendelssohn, isn't that right?" A subtle smile formed on Victoria's lips. "I see you've finally done your homework." "All right," Theodore continued, leaning forward. "I'm here to propose a deal. I know you're behind everything that's happened these past months. I don't know how you managed it, but I admit your competence." "I'm not sure I understand, Mr. Magellan. I'm just an agricultural consultant trying to help small producers," Victoria replied, her tone calm and measured. Theodore let out a dry laugh. "Let's drop the act, Victoria. You're the daughter of the man I had dealings with 20 years ago. You came here for revenge, didn't you? Well, you've had your revenge. I'm ruined. Satisfied? Now let's negotiate." Laura entered the room at that moment, carrying a folder of documents. Her eyes met Theodore's, and she immediately understood what was happening. "Negotiate what, exactly?" Victoria asked, her voice steady. "A dignified exit. I concede part of the land, reorganize the ranch's management, even accept a partner. But green gold is my legacy. You can't just take it from me." Victoria stood and walked to the window, looking out at the town square. "Your legacy, Theodore. What exactly will you leave behind? A town dependent on and afraid of you. Impoverished. Farmers, businesses ruined for not bowing to your demands. I built Pineville's progress," he protested, raising his voice. "This town was nothing before me." "This town could have been so much more without your greed," Laura countered, placing photos of areas degraded by Green Gold's predatory farming practices on the table. "Your business model is unsustainable, both environmentally and socially." Theodore looked at the photos, then at the two women who now faced him with unshakable determination. Finally, he understood there was no room for negotiation. "So that's it? You came to destroy everything I built because of a deal from 2 decades ago. Your father was naive, Victoria. In the business world, only the strong survive." "My father," Victoria said slowly, "was an honest man who trusted the word of a swindler. He lost everything: money, reputation, health. He spent his final years trying to prove he'd been deceived, but you had judges and politicians in your pocket." "He hanged himself," Laura added, her eyes blazing with restrained anger. "My grandfather took his own life because a man like you made him believe there was no hope left." The room fell silent. Theodore lowered his gaze, not out of remorse, but because he finally grasped the magnitude of what he was facing. This wasn't just financial revenge. It was a matter of family justice. "What do you want from me then?" he asked, defeated. "Nothing," Victoria replied. "Absolutely nothing. Green gold will go up for auction next week, as per the bank's foreclosure process. Any interested party can bid." 3 days later, Gabriel Magellan appeared at Victoria's office. Unlike his father, he came humbly, almost pleading. "My father is destroyed," he said. "He doesn't sleep, barely eats. The ranch is everything to him." "And what about you?" Laura asked, leading the meeting in her mother's temporary absence. Gabriel hesitated. "I always wanted to do things differently. I studied sustainable agriculture, tried to implement new techniques, but my father is inflexible. Magellans don't change, Magellans lead, he always said. And now? Now I want to know if there's any chance at all to keep at least part of the ranch, or even a job there under new management. I know that land better than anyone." Laura studied the young man's face, searching for signs of deceit or manipulation, but found only sincere desperation. "I can't promise anything," she finally replied, "but I can assure you your knowledge will be considered. Unlike your father, we don't mix business with personal feelings." The day of the auction arrived. The Pineville Rural Association building was packed. Local producers, regional businessmen, and curious onlookers gathered to witness the end of an era. Theodore Magellan, against his lawyer's advice, insisted on being present. Sitting in the front row, he maintained his proud posture, as if he were still the most powerful man in the region. Rumors had circulated that major national agribusiness groups would send representatives, but as the auction began, none appeared. "Strange," some murmured. "A property like green gold should attract investors from across the country." What no one knew was that in the weeks leading up to the auction, Victoria had activated her extensive network of contacts. Discreetly, she made it clear to potential bidders that acquiring green gold would come with unexpected complications. Contracts would be thoroughly audited, past environmental practices scrutinized, and employee relations reviewed. For groups with public images to protect, the warning was enough to keep them away. At 10 in the morning, the auctioneer began the process. After reading the terms, he announced the minimum bid, $20 million, less than half the ranch's value in its prime. The silence that followed was deafening. No bids. "Come on, gentlemen," the auctioneer urged nervously. "We're talking about the largest productive property in the central region." Finally, a woman's voice rang out from the back of the room. $20 million. It was Victoria, who had just entered, accompanied by Laura and 2 lawyers. A murmur swept through the crowd. Theodore turned sharply, his face contorted with disbelief and fury. $20 million first bid, the auctioneer announced, looking hopefully at the attendees. "Do I hear more?" Silence returned. After the required minutes passed without further bids, the auctioneer struck the gavel. "Sold for $20 million to—" "What name, ma'am?" "Mendelssohn Investments," Victoria replied, "representing the New Earth Rural Development Fund." Theodore stood abruptly and approached Victoria. "You planned this from the start," he accused, trembling with anger. "You came to destroy me." "No, Theodore," she replied calmly. "We came to restore the balance you broke so many years ago. My father believed in this region's potential. The land you fraudulently took from him was meant for a project very much like the one we're implementing now." The documents were signed, on the spot. As the process unfolded, townspeople timidly approached to congratulate the new owners. Many shared stories of how they had suffered under Theodore's predatory practices over the years. A week later, Green Gold Ranch, now officially renamed New Horizon Ranch, opened its doors for a meeting with all employees. Contrary to expectations of mass layoffs, Victoria announced that all jobs would be retained, with improved working conditions and profit sharing. "Our vision isn't just to produce, but to develop," she explained to the stunned staff. "We want to create a model of agriculture that respects the environment, values people, and strengthens the local economy." Laura took over as the ranch's technical director, quickly implementing regenerative farming practices and organic certification in key areas. To many surprise, she invited Gabriel Magellan to lead the Agricultural Innovation Department. "Why?" he asked, still wary during the meeting where he received the offer. "After everything my father did." "Because you're not your father," Laura replied, "and because justice doesn't mean perpetuating cycles of destruction, it means rebuilding better." In the following months, the transformation was visible. New Horizon became a hub for sustainable practices. The Small Producers Cooperative, now formally integrated into the project, gained access to technologies and markets previously out of reach. Pineville, which for decades had lived under one man's shadow, discovered the benefits of a diversified, collaborative economy. Theodore, meanwhile, moved to the state capital. With the little money he managed to salvage, he tried to start over, but his reputation preceded him. Former allies avoided association. Within a year, he was reduced to a modest apartment and an anonymous life. Ironically, the same fate he had imposed on Cassius Mendelssohn 2 decades earlier. One May afternoon, nearly a year after the auction, Theodore returned to Pineville. He drove to the gates of the former Green Gold and observed the changes. Lush fields, workers moving without the tension of before, new facilities under construction. Where the old, ostentatious sign had stood, a simple one now read, New Horizon. Ranch, cultivating sustainable futures. Summoning his courage, he entered the property and asked to speak with Victoria. To his surprise, he was received without hostility. "I've come to make one last request," he said after a long silence. In the office that had once been his. "My son, is he happy here?" Victoria smiled faintly. "Gabriel has found his path. He's applying knowledge he always wanted to implement, but never had the chance. People respect him for what he does, not for the name he carries." Theodore nodded, absorbing the information. "And what about me? Is there a place for me in this new world you've created?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Finally, Victoria replied, "Theodore, no one is so great they can't fall, nor so small they can't rise again. If you're truly willing to start over, not with your old power, but with new values, I can help you find a way." "Why?" he asked, genuinely confused. "After all I did to your family." "Because my father, despite everything he suffered, always taught that true success isn't about defeating adversaries, but transforming realities. I didn't come to Pineville just to reclaim what was ours, but to fulfill the dream he never could." That afternoon, an unlikely agreement was reached. Theodore Magellan, the man who had once ruled Pineville, accepted a consulting role in a social project run by the New Horizon Foundation, sharing his knowledge of the region with young farmers. The town, which had witnessed his fall, now saw his improbable redemption, not as the powerful rancher he had been, but as an ordinary man seeking to rebuild his dignity through honest work. And so the cycle was complete. Justice, as old Cassius Mendelssohn had said, wasn't about revenge but restoration. Victoria and Laura hadn't just reclaimed their family's stolen legacy. They had transformed it into something greater, a business model proving it was possible to prosper without exploiting, to grow without destroying, to lead without oppressing. On moonlit nights, when the Pineville sky filled with stars, Victoria often sat on the porch of the main house, now her home. Gazing at the fields stretching to the horizon, she felt her father's presence, as if he could finally rest in peace, knowing his daughter and granddaughter had not only reclaimed what was rightfully theirs, but turned those lands into a true new horizon for an entire community.